Flyvault.net presents Where the River Bends, a fly fishing short story. And now, Where the River Bends. The dust had settled, and so had the cousin of Colonel Ambrose Monell, Roy, who lay dead on the battlefields of Europe. Roy made the bold decision to help the cause and joined the trench war we know as World War I. It was written that Roy made that decision on day 2 of the war. Some years later, Ambrose would himself join the aviation service of the army and help train night bomber squadrons in France, being promoted rapidly to the rank of colonel due to his organizational skills and vast knowledge of metals. Ambrose, born in New York City in 1873, is one of those rare individuals who excelled in everything he chose to do. He attended and graduated the Columbia School of Mines in 1896. Upon graduation, was immediately hired at Carnegie Steel, promoted to chief metallurgical engineer and assistant to the president of the company. In 1902, Canadian and Orford copper companies merged, and young Ambrose was selected to run the merging companies, becoming the first president of the International Nickel Company, a position and title he would keep until 1917, when he left the company to join the army. Fishing was a serious passion and always had been for Ambrose. He was among the very first fishing for salmon with dry flies. Being the president of a major metals company no doubt came with some perks. Extra time off and excellent connections coupled with a handsome salary is a recipe for extended fishing trips in the summer. And it has been said he would have extra of his favorite flies made just to pass out to other anglers he happened to come upon when walking the banks. In the spring of 1911, Roy, an avid fisherman himself as well, a fly tyer, would take a trip with his beloved cousin Ambrose to the house of Herbert Howard. That day would mark the moment in history when a light went off in the mind of young Roy. Herb, a fly tyer by trade, and what some would call a master dresser of Atlantic salmon flies, had been experimenting with the use of silver fox as a substitute for the traditional featherwing dressings. Roy was no doubt impressed with this newer look to salmon flies, not to mention the more easily obtainable material. Herb gifted Roy half his pelt that he'd shot himself to use in his own experiments. Over the summer, Roy spent an unknown amount of time using, experimenting and developing hair-wing salmon flies with silver fox as well as other materials, to be sure. It would be later that year in the fall the two cousins would meet up to cast some lines at the lodge of Ambrose's fishing guide in New Brunswick. By this time, Roy had come up with several attempts that had proved to be somewhat effective to share with his cousin Ambrose. After the lodge owner had mentioned that the brook trout had been hitting grey and brown flies, Roy went to work tying. He started off with a few turns of gold tinsel, followed by a golden crest for the tail, adding grey fox underfur and ribbed with gold tinsel to make the body, finishing up the front with grey fox guard hair for a wing, and finally a grizzly hackle for a collar. The combination proved deadly. Roy had come up with a real winner. The pattern would find its way into the hands of many fishermen over the coming years. Being tied in a variety of colors, it became a staple pattern in many fly boxes for decades to come, with its most notable variation being tied by Clovis Arsenault at the request of Joseph Pulitzer II in 1949 after landing a 41-pound fish on something described as similar. No one knows what. The last thing Roy Agnes Thompson was thinking before his body lay silent. I'd like to believe he was thinking of his cousin and the times they spent fishing together. But what he had created that day in the fall of 1911 would prove to be anything but silent, as it has been used by the masses ever since. In fact, there's an entire series of flies created in the footsteps of the original, and they all bear Roy's name, or his initials, to be more precise, the rat fly, which Roy named after himself, with the most famous being the rusty rat, a variation that came 35+ years after his death and tied for Joseph Pulitzer. And now you've heard a long-lost story from a tyer's bench. and one can share with your friends when you meet them. Where the River Bends, your subscribe button went jogging with a television over its head. A cop thought he had stole it and punched him in the nose to stop him. When questioned, he revealed that he was getting ready for a telethon. The look on the detective's face was priceless. Take care, my friends, and as always, happy tying.